When I purchased my LC475 a few years ago, it didn't come with any peripherals, so I dug out my Apple design keyboard and have been using that ever since. It's not my favourite keyboard, nor is it particularly collectible, but it gets the job done. However, to make my setup more original, I've been on the lookout for an Apple keyboard too. Price of which seem to have skyrocketed lately, at least here in the UK, but one recently popped up locally on eBay for a decent price, albeit in an untested condition. So I took a punt and I bought it. UPS did a fine job at delivering it with a few extra cracks that were on it when I bought it. The three standoffs at the bottom of the case were completely snapped off but all present, so it should be just a case of gluing them back in. The corner, however, was completely snapped off, and I'm lucky that it was still inside the box when it arrived, as there was a nice hole in the bottom. If we open the case, we can see the three standoffs still in place, along with years of somebody else's dust bunnies. This is to be expected, as these keyboards were introduced in 1990 along with the original Macintosh Classic and Macintosh LC low-cost computer line, and to be honest, this isn't too bad. I've seen far worse in other keyboards. If we focus in here on the corner, you can just about make out where the standoff is snapped off from. All three are snapped in the same manner, so it should be easy enough to glue back into place. Glue isn't going to be as strong as it was originally, but it should work out nicely, provided I'm careful with it in the future. Colin from This Does Not Compute has had some success with a two-part superglue system in the past, so I bought some and I'm going to give it a try. If we're going to restore this keyboard to its former glory, we of course firstly need to take it to pieces, which can be a bit fiddly, and there's always a risk of breaking clips due to plastic turning brittle with age. As the three screws at the front of the keyboard aren't attached to anything, it's a little easier to disassemble. I plan on retrobriting this keyboard, even though it hasn't yellowed terribly like some plastics do. However, holding up a recently restored Apple Desktop Bus mouse, you can clearly see the difference in colour. Taking the keyboard to pieces further requires unscrewing three Phillips head screws from the main PCB. After this is done, all you need to do is disconnect a ribbon cable. Once done, the keyboard mechanism board can be slid up and out of the case, revealing an ADB connector board. This isn't connected to anything and can be slid out of the way with ease. This is a Mitsumi variant and uses sliders with conductive rubber feet that make contact with a single layer membrane. Above the plastic key plate, rubber cups are placed to provide the return spring function and tactility. Perhaps one of my least favourite jobs is removing the keycaps. Each keyboard is different, so there's always a risk of you damaging something further. And what I'm not keen on is the amount of force that's required to pull each keycap off. It just feels wrong. With some force and a keycap puller, we begin to remove the first row of keys from the number pad. Underneath, you can make out the white rubber domes mentioned earlier. I'm not the world's most patient person and I'm not overly keen on repetitive tasks, but with a keyboard refurbishment there's no other option unless you're going to skip this part. I look at it this way, I've already gone this far, so it would be churlish not to continue. The Apple Keyboard 2 features two ADB ports that function either as upstream to connect to a computer or another ADB device higher up the chain, or downstream for connecting a mouse or downstream peripheral. The cable is detachable and connects to either ADB port located on the back. Apple continued this layout with the introduction of the iMac's USB keyboard, although you didn't sacrifice one of the USB ports as you do with this model due to it having a hardwired USB cable. Right-handed people would typically use the right-hand ADB port for the mouse, and left-hand people would use the left-hand port. The other port would therefore be used to connect the cable back to the computer. The keycaps are pad printed and have Apple's typical bottom left legend with italic type. One of the quirks to this keyboard is the soft power on button. On some Macs, such as the Color Classic, rather than reaching around the back to toggle the power switch to turn the machine on or off each time, you would flip the switch to its on position and then press the power button on the keyboard to start it up. Once you were done with the machine and shut it down, it would power off. The next time you wanted to use the computer, simply press the power button on the keyboard again. Whilst this button is present on the Apple Keyboard 2, the functionality in my LC475 doesn't exist. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is because it was included in the box yet serves no purpose with such machines. To my surprise, there was only a small collection of dust to remove and not many crumbs, but I'll be giving it a going over with a brush and some IPA to make it looking spick and span, even though you generally don't see this area. I suspect that UPS dropped the package on one corner due to a broken piece of plastic on the bottom case, but I also found one of the keys was damaged in the corner too. The piece was still present, so I'm going to try and super glue it on. It won't look original, but I'm okay with that. I'd rather fill the gap with the broken piece rather than having a gaping hole in the key. Apologies here for the in and out of focus shots. My camera was getting itself all confused at what it should be focusing on. According to Loctite's Super Glue All Plastics Rapid Dual Action Adhesive System is specifically designed to work on plastics to form a resilient, invisible bond in seconds. This super glue is a two-part cyanoacrylate adhesive that sets in seconds and develops tremendous strength with as little as one drop. Especially designed for resilient bonding of plastic surfaces for strong and reliable solutions. The reason why I'm using this opposed to regular super glue is that I've often found a white discoloration can occur when used on plastics, so I'm hoping that this product is designed for plastics and it will be a non-issue. We first need to run the surface activator over both surfaces and leave it for about 60 seconds or so to dry, and then carefully squeeze out a small drop of glue onto the surface and press them together, and hold until set. As this is a new tube of super glue, the first squeeze pushed out too much glue, so rather than getting it everywhere and sticking my fingers together, I used a pair of tweezers, and then used the end to gently fill in the gaps between the plastics, and left them to set. As this piece is on the enter key of the numerical keypad section, it's not going to be that visible, and as I don't strike that part of the key, I think it'll be fine. I also like how this adds to the keyboard's story. It does seem to set pretty quickly, and so far I've not noticed any discoloration that I mentioned. These keys aren't particularly grubby, but will require washing to get them clean again. I'll have to pay special attention to this key to make sure that I'm not too enthusiastic with my scrubbing and undoing the work I've just carried out. I usually place the keys in a bowl in the sink with some warm water and some dish soap. A quick bit of agitation and then a quick scrub with a plastic scourer is all that is required, but we'll see more of that shortly. We next need to turn our attention to the 3 broken standoffs. I don't have high hopes that the super glue is going to work out too well here, as a little bit of force is required to screw and unscrew the Phillips head screws that hold the front of the keyboard together. I'll reserve judgment though for when I'm ready to put the keyboard back together. The process for this is exactly what we've just previously covered, except I need to remove the standoffs from the screws first. I'll apply the activator to both the keyboard top cover and the snapped off standoff, apply some glue and then hold until set. I didn't want to do these all at once and risk mixing them up and not getting a decent bond with the glue. I just did them one at a time. Nothing exciting here, just unscrew, glue and wait. We then repeat the process a further 2 more times and cross my fingers that it'll hold. We'll see later if it did or not. I'm pleased that the damage was minimal considering how poorly it was packaged. It's time to clean the keyboard's mechanism board. Considering this keyboard is about 30 years old, I was surprised by the lack of build-up of debris between the keys. We'll just take a bottle brush, as it's the only brush I could find to hand, and gently rub it between the switches themselves. I say switches, they're not really like the clicky Alps or Cherry switches used in higher end keyboards, but that's why it was relatively cheap and bundled with the low end machines of the time. Once I've gone over it with the brush, I'm going to use some IPA on a paper towel to clean away the more stubborn parts. The whole process didn't take as long as I was expecting, and I'm pleased that there were no nasty surprises in here, like dead bugs or anything else. As no further action is required for this part, we'll set it to one side and move on to my second least favourite part of a keyboard restoration, the cleaning of the keycaps. As previously mentioned, all I use is some lukewarm water and a generous splodge of some dish soap, and then agitate for a few seconds. I found that generally this is all that's required to remove the dirt without much effort. That is, of course, as long as it's not something more stubborn. I'm glad that there's not a row of function keys or extras like page up or page down, so it shouldn't take long to clean all the keys. I decided this time to leave the metal clips on the back of some of the larger keys. Usually I worry about them rusting, but they'll only be wet for a short amount of time, and as long as I give them a thorough drying, this should be a non-issue. Once all the keycaps have been cleaned, I'll rinse them off with some fresh clean water and place them in a Pyrex jug, as we'll be doing a spot of indoor retrobriting. The process that I found works best is to place the keycaps into the jug and fill with hydrogen peroxide. When pouring in the hydrogen peroxide, some of the keys will start to float, so poking them with a knife helps remove any air bubbles from their surface and causes them to sink. To ensure that each key is exposed evenly to the UV light, every 30 to 45 minutes or so I'll agitate them with my knife and return the light to the top. The hydrogen peroxide I use is 12% food grade and can be purchased relatively easily. I'm not a chemist, but I believe that it's 12% hydrogen peroxide and 88% water, but if you do know, please let me know in the comments, as this is outside my area of expertise. 12% seems to be the strongest I can find without hunting too hard. To help speed up the process and to reflect some of the UV rays, I wrap the jug in some tin foil. This also helps to keep some of the heating that's generated, as warmer hydrogen peroxide seems to work faster than cold. I'm only doing this loosely, and for bigger projects such as the keyboard top case, I don't always do it. Even without this step, the process seems to work out quite successfully. As the keys and top case aren't very yellowed, this process should take no time at all. It's just a case of wandering off to go and do something else whilst the UV light does its thing. This is a 40 watt LED UV light which I picked up from eBay. I'll return every 30 to 45 minutes to stir everything up, just so all of their keys get a chance to bathe in the light. The top case got the same treatment as the keys, a gentle clean in some warm water with dish soap, a rinse and then a bath in hydrogen peroxide for a few hours, and we're done. I didn't film the reassembly process as it's just doing the reverse of what we've just done, but suffice to say I'm very pleased with the results. Whilst it hadn't yellowed too badly, the cleaning and the short retrobriting has done wonders, and it's given my LC475 the aesthetic I was going for. So did the superglue hold? Well, sort of. The pieces on the bottom case have held up well, but the standoffs not so much. I've had to reglue them a further twice, using more glue than I originally used. It's firm now, but I need to be very gentle with it moving forwards. Would I recommend the two-part treatment? Well, yes and no. The yes bit is for the glue not distorting the plastic as I mentioned earlier, but the two-part is a little bit awkward, and what I found is, as soon as the glue is applied to the accelerant, it starts to set immediately, and it's almost dry before you have a chance to marry up both pieces of plastic. If I have another project in the future that requires a simple plastic repair, I might give it another go. Anyway, thanks for watching, see you in the next one.